Sanbonani dumelang huemore ukhandet. No, I'm a proud South African. You must greet the people, you know. Otherwise, you walk away and then the people says, he comes, he talks to us, he doesn't even greet. What child is that? I was raised in Soweto by parents who, if I didn't greet the people, they would take serious challenge with that. So it's great to be here. I want to thank Dennis for the kind invitation to come and address this particular gathering, the Business Cafe, and be genuinely reminded of, the title that's on the screen, in some ways, if I was to put the subtext to it, I would say, what's wrong with South Africa can be fixed with what's right with South Africa. And the dilemma we face is the dilemma that says to all of us, that as we drove into the golf club with Ulrich, he came to pick me up, I thought to myself, there was a temptation to park at the ladies' captain thing. So we made the right choice, I want to say. But it struck me as interesting that I thought to myself, had I lived in this town in what is less than 30 years ago, the probability of me being able to come into the golf club would have been minimal. So, or zero, as you've correctly put it, none. And that belies part of what is the challenge with this country. Is because much of the challenge that we face up to is a country upon which there are many South Africas. When someone talks to me about South Africa, you have to answer the question, which South Africa are you in fact referring to? Others would argue the case there is a South Africa that is wealthy, and equally so there's a South Africa that is poor. There's South Africa that is, in fact, where if you look at our educational outcomes, the schools are working well, and there's South Africa upon which 80% of the schools are fairly dysfunctional. Others would make the strong case to say there's a South Africa that is black and a South Africa that is white. I happen to have the great privilege that in my house, my wife is a white South African and we've got mixed race kids. So we live in the South Africa that is, if we just get an Indian child, then on Sosmostrar. Then we have the Rainbow Nation. But it belies the challenge, and often and in many cases, you find for many of us, our experiences are exiled from one another. We don't know what happens on the other side of the road, as it were, and the lived experiences. So when I speak to you today about a socio-economic and a resilient economy for the people of this country, I want to speak to us as South Africans, regardless of the color of your skin, to say what is of fundamental importance is that all of us as South Afrikaners have a significant contribution to make to our country. And that is the first anchor point. So before I unpack what perhaps are some of the challenges that we face, I want to begin with the first challenge that was identified early back by President Nelson Mandela, who said, post-1994, we can introduce RDP, which was the Reconstruction and Development Program. But then he asked this fundamental question, what are we going to do about the RDP of the soul? In many instances, we're a wounded people. In many instances, we look at one another. And my first challenge I want to put forward to all of us is that perhaps maybe the fundamental problem with South Africa is that we've alienated ourselves from our own values as a society. No economy, no country will be sustainable unless we deal with the question of values. Values are the things you can't police. Those are the things that tell me that stealing is wrong. Or those are the things that tell me that actually when I live in society, here's how I must think about fellow human beings. Now as Africans, all of us, the one value we all share is a value that says Ubuntu. Enshrined in our constitution is the idea that we need to guarantee, you can take away any right, but you dare never take the right to dignity, the right to Ubuntu. Now you might ask the question, why is that important? It is vital because if you define the idea of Ubuntu, it says, I can see that you are a human being. And bathi ngesiZulu, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, or kasitswana bari motho ke motho ka batho. Ek weet nie hoe dit sê dit in Afrikaans, maar ons sal maar net probeer, jy weet. But it says, I recognize that your humanity, I share common humanity, or as Archbishop Tutu so wisely put it, that in fact, I see the divine in you. It says at the starting point that before you are black, white, Indian, or colored, we share common humanity. And we must remind ourselves as that as South Africans. Because hear me correctly when I say this, that yes, we're a diverse nation and a beautiful nation. But we share a common thing, which is we all form part of the human race. Philosophically, that matters economically, it matters in terms of human dignity, but it matters as far as our interconnectedness as human beings. Because our interconnectedness as a function of Ubuntu says it cannot be that I can live on this side of the mountain and throw away food while there's another human being on that side of the mountain who does not have food that night. The reason I got into politics, I was involved as a youth worker, I was serving God, I was doing all sorts of things. I decided one day to go, and we were delivering food in this community. I went to sit with this woman, and I looked at this woman who was living, we were living 5 kilometers apart from each other. That's not a long distance. That's a distance, as the presentation is one that I can walk, I think. Although if you look at my running statistics, I do walk. Arrive at this woman's house, I say, Mama, what are you doing? Mama Utugum, look, I'm digging a hole in my garden. I said, why? He said, because I want to build myself a toilet. It struck me odd that I just left my house with 4 toilets. Not 1, 4. Yet I arrived at a woman's house who was digging a hole in a garden to just build 1 toilet. My interconnectedness must remind me of that injustice. And that value must be shared by all South Africans. And that's what we reset as a values conversation. Because in truth, if we lose our values, it's what allows corrupt people to sit outside. You see, I can see outside through those glass windows. It would be like a father who sits outside, eats all the food, and then comes into the house and convinces their children that they are still hungry and that there's no food for the children. All of us would look at that father and say, you evil person. But isn't that what corruption is? But it doesn't begin at what we typically call state capture. It begins at a lack of values. It begins when someone says, my interconnectedness to other human beings ceases to exist. I find it deplorable when I see some of our politicians arrive in fancy cars as mayors of towns, and when they get to a funeral of a child who died in a sewage they should have fixed, but they feel comfortable arriving in the most expensive vehicle to that particular funeral. Now, that's not a crime. No one can say, don't drive an X5 and go to a funeral. But it tells me that the values of that person have long been disconnected from the people they are instructed to serve. So if we're going to fix anything about sustainability, about justice, we need to restore our sense of values. Because it is those values that help us in many ways say to ourselves, when I look at women in this country, I do not see slaves, but I see fellow human beings. Because we can lament gender-based violence all we like, but when it's said and done, it's a function of values when men cannot see the value in women as fellow human beings. No human being is born complete. No one. we need other human beings to help us be complete. So our starting point this morning is that, because if you don't get that value, we will forever grapple with conversations regarding race in a way that forgets that, yes, you and I might be of different skin color, but there is, in some ways, the one race, which is the human race. And I live this at home. I tell you, my wife is half Welsh, half Lebanese. I actually live in fear, to tell you the truth. But the fundamentals of this issue is that if you want to own the value of Ubuntu, you must also own the value of justice and equity. That says human beings must participate. You see, the problem with laws like BBBEE is that they've become a compliance exercise instead of being a value for justice. That maak nie 'n verskil how we write the law. The law itself can be changed from time to time. Just like us as Kaizer Chiefs supporters know, we support the team, but we don't like how it plays, so we want to change it, right? So you can support justice and say how the law is written does not help that justice. Let's rewrite the law so that, who knows, maybe when you talk about bylaws in communities, what if it happened that you could get the business community to set up a justice fund that would help put venture capital in small businesses, in communities, in townships, so that they can rise up to become multi-million rand businesses? That is justice. It could be a different way of writing the law. So don't worry too much about the codes. Worry a lot about the value of justice. That says, I see human indignity before me. Fellow South Africans, I don't think we have an appreciation of some of the challenges that people... I was listening quite attentively and I took some notes. So if I can ask you for a presentation, I would really value that. Because it isn't just often... sometimes we don't see the picture, and I am glad we had someone who could speak about the local George. I want to paint the picture as to what some of our national challenges look like. If you were to line up the people who are unemployed in this country, before I give you statistics, because it'd be a dangerous thing. If the people who are unemployed in this country lined up in a socially distant manner, if you'll remember that time, they would start in Cape Town and they would finish in Cairo. That's the line of unemployment in this country. When you look at a deep understanding of our educational outcomes, 40% of our students, so of the million kids who start school, 40% will drop off before they get to matric. Whilst many of us are challenged by crime in this country, I always say to myself, let's keep in mind that every day, the daily average of murder in this country is 67 people daily. Now, I'm not sure how many died in Ukraine yesterday, but I'm almost certain for a country that's not at war, our murder rates are extraordinarily high. When we look at our skills level, as they link perhaps to education, if you think about the ranking, out of 141 countries, South Africa's skills as it pertains to the workforce sits at 101. We're ranked 101. As far as digital skills amongst the active population, we're at 128. And perhaps when you look at critical thinking in teaching, we're at 95. That's a skills base of our country. So the challenges we're facing today are about to get exacerbated in 10 years from now. 70% of youth under the age of 25 are unemployed. And my worry is that they are unemployable as a function of a skills base. 18 million South Africans are dependent on some form of welfare grant of some sort. we can discuss, and I heard the Honorable Member speak about undocumented migration. But we've often sat back and watched neighboring countries collapse around us. So before I depress you further, because I know that's not why you came today, I think we have to ask the basic question, what then must we do? I believe that this country has a profound vision. And I want to propose just a number of key things that perhaps maybe indicate what can be done. I think we need to think as one. When I started by saying what's wrong with South Africa can be fixed with what's right with South Africa, we need to ask what's right with South Africa to think of a South Africa that works for everybody. And the first, as I proposed, is that it may be important that we put together a national venture capital fund. I maintain that as a crucial component. If you want to do anything here, let me tell you the truth. For micro enterprise that sits in communities, it does not need too much money. It needs just some money. Now you might say, what are the securities? And this would be where I would challenge banks to say we must think of the idea of securities in a different way than we've thought about it. Let me give you a real example. Over the weekend, my wife and I went out to go buy pizza. So I arrive at this pizza shop, I meet a businessman there. He says to me, I want to talk to you because I can't secure a loan for my business. I said, what's your problem? He says, I have a house in Soweto. The bank says that house is not worth anything, so they can't loan me against that house. But then I also have another house in North Riding, whom the bank actually owns, because I'm still paying it off. They reckon that's better collateral than the one in Soweto. I said, but why? You come to a rural area, someone says, I've got cattle. The bank says, no, boss, give us something different that we can underwrite so that we can give you money. But the cattle are an asset. Right? You come to another place. My mother built two, you know, if you in the township we had these homes, but they had big yards, so we put backyard dwellers. That's a legitimate lease agreement. But when she goes to the bank to say, I have a lease agreement to which I want to borrow against so I can put this one through school, the bank say, no. Give us a different collateral. So we had to bond the entire house to the same bank. Today I sit here with 2 master's degrees thanks to that. But the reality is, in all fairness, that business that my mother owns of backyard dwellers and rental agreements is as legitimate a business as any other. And she's fed us, put me through school through that business. Had it not been for that business, I maybe not have been here today. But why can't the banking sector in South Africa recognize the importance of lease agreements, particularly as it comes to township economies? Fellow South Africans, we have to give definitions of our economy as we have it. Not as we wish we had it always, as we have it. Our citizens have got a different asset base that is particularly different given today's context. So if we want to reset our economy, let's reset what the asset base looks like. And I would urge further that the future of this country will pertain to how we value property as it pertains to land, so that our citizens are able to have the economic dignity to participate. For if we do not break down the 2 South Africas I started off with, we are going to have a question of sustainability. Others would say there shall be no peace, and actually there cannot be peace. I challenge you further to say, perhaps we must use laws of equity to introduce a way with which our education system is transformed. These are issues that sit here, George, that maybe happen underneath. There are some schools that do extraordinarily well. I'm sad that we live in a country today where still too many of our citizens, by privilege of where they are born, will determine what education they get. If you find yourself in the wrong income group, in the wrong community, the school in your neighborhood will not deliver the outcomes we need. I mean, here's a frightening thought. Of the million students that start school, only 29,000 of them, for those of you who are accountants, because this is a very serious room, 29,000 of them will pass mathematics at C level. In an economy that's digitizing, you tell me what happens to the rest. So again, I challenge this idea. Rather than, in fact, all of us trying to take the schools that are doing well and saying, let's pull them down, let's rather go out, invest heavily. I've had this conversation with the private education sector to say to them, let's take Kuro and all of those schools and say to them, we, from a government and a public sector point of view, will provide the land and the school and the buildings, and we'll pay the teachers. You bring the expertise, and we'll make sure that as a public-private partnership, we create charter schools so that children who are in the townships don't have to walk for days to go find a quality education, but they can walk down the road and get a school that works for them. And I know many of us sitting in this room, I want to say this. I didn't want to say it, but maybe I should say it. Particularly for churches, because I come from the church. Churches have got incredible buildings. Those buildings mainly, what are they doing during the week? Why aren't we giving afternoon programs for young people to be able to access free internet so that they can become digital citizens? We can do better. But we have to think as a South Africa that works for all. I've challenged the idea to say, one of the things as the business community, what if you started to challenge even national policy around, when I think about even things like BBBEE, I would one day hope that we can give points for anyone who employs people. You raised it. You talk about jobless growth. And through COVID, I want to maintain, and I say this to you, that the heroes of today are not politicians. The heroes of today is anyone who wakes up in the morning and creates a job for a fellow South African. That's a hero. Because economic freedom is the issue of today. So anyone who gives a job and gives dignity should be seen in the light of a hero. Why don't we incentivize people like that? We have to focus on the issue of safety by localizing police. At this stage, we have a national SAPS issue. But what if we brought it locally, merged it with the Metro Police, and then invited the private sector policing so that they work together, so that we can ultimately put the fear into criminals rather than into citizens? Because at this point, the crooks are walking around freely, and the citizens are building higher and higher walls. I joke, the other day I was driving past Victor Fester. Now, if you drive on that road, to your left is Steenberg Golf Estate. To your right is Victor Fester. When I looked at the walls to my left, I realized they were higher than the walls to my right. I thought, who exactly is living in prison? It makes you realize where the fear lies. I'm a father to 2 girls. I worry for them. I worry that they get into an Uber and something goes wrong. I worry that they could not walk around freely in this country. But crime is not committed by all the citizens. It's committed by some of the citizens, and they repeat it over and over again. We know them, and in the policing sector, we must prioritize murder to make sure people are locked away. And I know here in George, one of the greater challenges that you are beginning to face up to is the idea of what happens around crime. And I tell you what, we have to reform the police service so that we can ensure that we are much more animated by protecting our citizens. No one is going to be a tourist in a country that's unsafe. You can be guaranteed of that. But the last 2 things I want to say is we must fix economic infrastructure. If we're going to build the fact of the matter is that no economy is going to grow when the lights are off. They're not going to. And I don't want to say, I happen to like Mr. Andre de Ruyter. But in truth, he hasn't delivered energy. So my assessment of it mustn't be whether I like him or not. My assessment is whether the lights are on or off, and they are not on. Bottom line. Don't care what race you are. The truth is, you can't keep the lights on, that's your job. If you are not doing it, let's find someone who must do the job to keep the lights on. Now, I know many people might say, Mr. Maimane Vahabiki, he inherited a mess. I say, yes, all CEOs inherit messes. But we have to think about energy resilience South Africa. And I know many people are saying, well, let's talk about renewables. Renewables only consume 11% of our total contribution to the grid. So we are not going to wake up tomorrow morning and all the renewables are going to stabilize our grid. 65% of our energy supply is coal. So there is only one of two questions. The first is this: how do we mine and build coal in a sustainable way so that we are not doing further environmental damage? And I've engaged companies that ensure that we can capture the emissions and begin to transform them into something that's environmentally sustainable. We have to respond to that question. Because whilst all of us can go to COP and talk about how we must get away from coal, the reality of it for where South Africa sits is that at 65% of our coal generation, we have to farm it responsibly and transition it for an environmentally friendly product. It may be difficult to hear, because I'm a pro-renewables, but in the next 2 years, renewables are not going to solve our problem. We have to think about how we increase our nuclear capacity, and I've spoken about SMRs, which are nuclear reactors that give us a degree of energy that is stable over a period of time. You might say, nuclear, what is nuclear? I say, don't worry about the technology. Worry that we can do something that is sustainable to stabilize our energy demands. And then the second of economic infrastructure is that it's very difficult to run an economy without water coming out of every tap. Particularly. When you go to Gqeberha, not far from here, there have been communities that have been without water for 3 months. You are not going to run a business, let alone a household. So let me tell you, fellow South Africans, I genuinely believe that it is possible. I have a vision that says to us, we can grow at between 3 to 5%. We have to articulate a vision for South Africa 2030. And South Africa 2030 ought to be a nation upon which more citizens are able to find work. It ought to be a nation where ultimately our educational outcomes are such that every child who starts school can finish his school with the appropriate subjects in the STEM component, increasing our pass rate from 30% to about 50%. So that our kids are able not only to transition from the third industrial revolution to the fourth and to the fifth. We need to build a nation that is safe, and we need to ensure that cities, particularly city governance, is capacitated to deliver against that. I would argue strongly, we've all obsessed when Zondo commissioned about state capture at national level, but we failed to see what happens at state capture at city level. Because I think that would make national state capture look like a picnic. Because in municipalities, there aren't enough newspapers, yet. So people are not reading to say that there are people there who are building a stadium that looks like a chicken shed for millions and millions of rands. So fellow, we have to work harder. I want to close just with this thought about leadership and public leadership. If you are going to reform values and get a vision for this country, we need leaders of integrity. And this here for me is where it's a challenge. Because the way we elect our leaders means that all leaders are elected for the sole purpose of serving party politics rather than serving the people they elect. Now, I know you might say, but now you are starting to. Let's be honest. Unless we reform the Electoral Act that will allow people to come back to constituencies and we can directly elect not only MPs, but elect the president, we will always end up with leaders who are committed to parties rather than to the people. I can tell you no politician sitting in parliament today fears you, which is a strange thing if you think about it. They don't fear. They know that so long as they are in good hands inside the party, they will never have to face up to the voters until they come every 5 years, either bring you food parcels or a t-shirt, and then say, stem no, stem reg, and then that's how we go. And then after that, they disappear for 5 years. Our system does not allow for fresh talent to end up in parliament. We need, Dennis, ethical leadership. Leadership that will stand up and say, and by the way, I've been thinking about this at length. It might sound super controversial, but I do think we need minimum qualifications for public leadership. I'm tired of public leaders who arrive in parliament, they can't even read annual reports. Yes, what excuse do you have after 28 years? I can understand in 1994, you might say, well, I had an apartheid system that said I couldn't go study. But 28 years into democracy, at least we must ask our leaders to have a degree in something so that at least they can contribute to our problems. Otherwise, we have leaders who, when I sit in, I promise you now, if we are having to retrain people how to use Zoom, how are they going to tell us about metaverse? How do you do that? And I know it's hard. These things are hard. But we need ethical leadership. Because you can today, and it's not just political leadership, it's bureaucratic leadership. There is now an inbuilt incentive to make sure the system is offline. There's an incentive for that. If I'm a civil servant who works in a particular place, and I know that when the line gets longer and longer at the Home Affairs, I can go around to somebody and say to them, I can give you a VIP service for an additional cost, we'll get your ID quickly. Suddenly there's an incentive for the system to be offline. And I'm afraid we've created that culture where people feel like being a civil servant is a side hustle. The main job is to run a business where you can provide public services. I lament because it's a function of leadership, ethical leadership. But I want to challenge business leaders sitting in this room. Let's stop being victims. We must be more business activists. I love what Mem said. Bylaws are published for public comment and no one says anything. It's true. Because in our constitution where it says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, we've ignored the term belongs. We think there's a spare South Africa that we can pull out once this one has failed. We must realize that this is our nation and we need to contribute to it and we need to build it. We have to. And if I could challenge you as business leaders, begin to make your submissions, begin to make your voice strong, advocate for issues, but be activists. You know, when I got into business, I left Parliament in 2019. I said, I can do one of two things. I can go study an MBA, to which, as anyone knows, if you want to know if someone has an MBA, they'll tell you. It's true. Or I said I could go run businesses. And you know, we started to set up a private equity for social impact. We wanted to invest. These things I'm telling you they wanted to invest. And I want to tell you, I heard someone say, yes, the stores are being owned by immigrants. That's maybe a story for the spaza shops. But economic activity in township is beyond just spaza shops. All you have to do is go to a funeral in the township. You can appreciate what businesses are there. You get there, there's a catering business there. There's a chair business, there's a tent business, there's an undertaker who is there. All of these are owned by South Africans. The question we must ask is, how do we support those businesses so they can go to another level? But we don't ignore the spaza shop and say they are simply just gone. What we have to do is say, and I challenge even those businesses to say, I've even made a submission to Minister Patel to say, Minister Patel, ShopRite's benefit is that the cost of bread arrives at ShopRite, if it arrives at 8 rands, is the cost of bread. Because they benefit from bulk buying and supply chain development, they benefit from those things. We have to regulate to say that same, if the cost of bread is 8 rand at ShopRite, it must be 8 rand at the spaza shop. Because if it arrives at 10 rands at a spaza shop because they have to increase production costs, etc., and they don't own the supply chain, be assured the spaza shops are going to close because they can't compete with ShopRite. Give them the right to compete. All of us are human beings seeking comfort. We're not going to walk forever to a ShopRite that's far. We will walk to the spaza shop so long as the price is comparable. When someone says we're using 22% of our income for transport, in a world where actually the super wealthy are no longer doing that, thanks to opportunities to work from home, etc., we must. Why is there no digital infrastructure in townships so that all the call centers can run from townships? Why not? Because it's all internet. If I'm calling from India seeking a product, I don't know where the person is sitting under a shack, under a mansion, or whatever. All I know is that on the internet, they're able to help me with my service. Let's reimagine South Africa that works for all. I am privileged. I've been able to travel. A number of years ago, I boarded an Airlink flight. I flew into Lusaka in Zambia. And when I got to Lusaka, I noticed we landed very far from the tarmac, from the airport. So we are cruising along in this airport. I think to myself, this is strange, you know. Why are we taxiing for so long? It felt like we landed in Pretoria and we're taxiing to OR Tambo. And then I look out the window, I see the army is standing there as army generals. I don't know, here come down. The last time I saw that was when the French government were trying to lock up the guy who was running WikiLeaks. So I thought, someone in this plane is in groot moeilikheid. So like the Instagram generation, I pull out my phone because I go, this is going to be good. The general comes into the plane, I start filming the general. I think this is going to be incredible. As I'm filming, I notice I get a close-up of the general. He's now here. I say, I put my phone down because I think I'm doing the filming that's wrong. He says, Mr. Maimane, we are here for you. I say, well, what's the problem? I was traveling with one security and one chief of staff. The security gets up, says, hey, they're speaking in the same language now. What has he done? Says, no, we are under no obligation to tell you. But like a good South African, I pull out my phone, I start to phone the ambassador on the other side. They say, put the phone down. And then I look at them and give them what is a standard South African line. Do you know who I am? I tell them this. I look at it, I say, do you know who I am? Says, we know exactly who you are. That's why we came for you. So now I start to panic. I get up. Now we're starting to stand up because now the whole plane is entertained. Hey, they grab us, they grab this guy, they put him down. I say, no. Now I'm in serious. I get back to my seat, I sit down. The pilot comes out from the front, he kneels in the seats in front and he's talking to me. In the only time where my Afrikaans became as pure as gold. He says, meneer Maimane, luister vir my baie mooi, jy is in groot moeilikheid. Says, wat gaan nou aan? He says, hulle soek al jou technology, iPads, everything. Ek sal dit vat. En eendag as jy terugkom in Suid-Afrika, sal ek dit vir jou gee. Ek bly in vereniging. As jy terugkom, dan bel jy vir my en jy kan jou staf kom kry. I said, yes, I am finished now. So I hand over my iPad now to the pilot and the phone. I get up now. They start to disembark other passengers. The passenger walks by me, he says to me, Mr. Maimane, I run private clinics in Zambia. If they arrest you, when they arrest you, tell them to bring you to my prison. I'll organize you a special room. I said, I left home with the express purpose of going to visit a prisoner, a political prisoner. The leader of the opposition was in prison. I thought I'll go visit them. They said, Mr. Maimane, now I'm going to spend the night in jail. I think that's not what I bargained for. Fortunately, again, another trait of being a good South African, I had another phone. So I say to the guy, please, can I go to the bathroom? He says, sure you can. I grab my bag, says, leave the bag behind. So I leave it behind, I sneak the phone in, I put it in my pocket, I go to the loo. As I sit in the loo, I make the call back to South Africa. I say, guys, I phoned my chief of staff there. I say to them, listen, phone them and tell them I've been detained in Zambia. Put it in every news item. My wife says she was sitting at home and the ticker tape at the bottom said, Maimane detained in Zambia. She thinks to herself, is this my Maimane? Just as a side tip, I want to say to you, please, when in trouble, phone your wife first. But I had not given time to say I'll call her. So now they put it, now the news starting to highlight, and then I can see people's phones are ringing now. The general comes back, he says, Mr. Maimane, I'll never forget these words. The temperature is rising. Okay? I sit back again. They take us out, they take everybody else, they give us, eventually after a few hours, they hand us new tickets. Yeah, board the plane, your luggage is still in the thing, you can leave Zambia right now. Still don't know what I did, just because I went to go visit a political prisoner. It so happens that a few years later, that political prisoner became the president of Zambia. Hakainde Hichilema was elected, and then he invited me to his inauguration. Board at the same ailing clinic, now a year or so ago, arrived in Lusaka. I saw the same army lined up. They got up on the plane. 3 men again. They come up again. They get up. They look at the lady, because you know when you sit on an airlink, it's a small plane. They look at her, and I'm sitting in 1A. They say, we are here for passenger 1A. This time I'm alone. I think I've seen this movie. I'm ready now. I pick up my bags. I'm ready. They say, Mr. Maimane, welcome to the inauguration of President Hakainde Hichilema. You are his honored guest. Now, when you walk the red carpet and the army that had arrested you is standing on the side, you can do nothing but moonwalk. I'm telling you, I was looking at those guys going, yeah. I'm here. Yeah, it's me again. We attended the inauguration. I had the privilege to sit with the president on inauguration day and kneel down and pray together. As proud Africans, to pray together. Today, the Zambian kwacha is stronger than the rand. Today, the Zambian kwacha is delivering a space upon which economic activity is rising. Today, the Zambians are providing more bursaries to learners than they've ever done before. Inflation is decreasing rather than increasing. The point at the end of the day is that change does happen. It's painful, it's hard, it does happen. And I can recall, even earlier on, when people like Oliver Tambo were traveling around, they went to Mozambique and saw change, went to Zambia and saw change, went to Zimbabwe and saw change. If I've said anything today, is that when you look at the track of South Africa's business confidence, every time is at its lowest, have been points upon which significant change has started. And in 1950 it started. We know the change that occurred there. In 1980, economic business confidence was low, and when you head towards 1990, as it started to be low and a new government came in place, it recognized the fact that change had to come. Today we are living in a South Africa where business confidence is at its lowest. Regardless of who the leadership of the government is now, it was lower. It is lower than it was under President Zuma, just as a point of reference. Investment confidence is lower today, which is an indicator of the fact that South Africa is preparing for change. We dare not fear change. We need to advance it, because democracy works like that. And every so often we need to see these big wheels of change. So yes, you might say to me, what are you betting on? What gives you hope for South Africa? Is that the young people who are unemployed, miseducated, will stand up together in 2024 and usher in a significant change. Because in truth, life change and societal change has been led by people, not by politicians, and the politicians follow. So if I give you any message, is that you are more powerful than you would have thought. God has truly been faithful to our country. And I believe that come 2024, He will still be, because change is a necessary component of our country. And if we want to build a new, resilient socio-economic society, let's have a vision for our economy, let's reform it, and you are a key participant of ushering in change in our nation. God bless you. Thank you very much.